Thank you for joining me today for a walk in the garden. This is an episode in a gardening series that's being filmed in my yard. I'm Liz Davey, and I'm a Norfolk resident, and I have several different kinds of gardens which we're going to stroll through today and learn a little more about what we can pick, how we can use what we pick, and also what's in bloom right now in the perennial garden. Right now we're in the shade garden. And it's really come along very well since we've gotten some rain. We had a lot of drought in April, late April, and most of May. But now that it's June, this is probably when gardens are at their best. The trick is to keeping things blooming and thriving the rest of the season. But June is always a nice time in the garden. There are, however, a lot of chores to do, but it's kind of a joy because the weather's nice and it's fun to be outside. This is the sorrel that we used in one of our earlier episodes, and now it's going to seed, so it's time to cut it back. And we'll just snip it off. You can continue to use the younger leaves, and it will continue to make leaves. But this will keep it from reseeding. And it just looks a little neater in the garden. One more. Since the last show, I've put in a few more annual herbs. This is a scented geranium. We put in the stevia last time. The scented geranium has started to bloom. The blooms aren't much to look at, but the leaves are what is scented. Make a very nice garnish, or you can do several recipes with them, which we may do in another episode. I have Nepetella, which is an Italian herb. It's very much in the oregano family, a little milder than that. Winter savory. One of the herbs that is not edible is tansy, and that is a good moth preventative. Several different kinds of thyme. I have caraway thyme, lemon thyme, moving over garlic chives, two more non-edible herbs, rue and southernwood. Again, those can be used to prevent moths by tying them in bunches. Moths and mice don't like them very much. Coming up here, I have a rose that is in full bloom. Now this is a single blooming rose. It's called Rose officinalis. It's an old rose, an old-fashioned rose. It's very sweet smelling. The petals are just very fragrant. And it has been used in apothecary work as a scent, potpourri, and also the petals can be used and candied and used as a dessert. It is edible. The petals are edible. The chive blossoms, they're almost finished. They can be snipped off if you wish, or just let them go to seed. I have a variety of mint, chocolate mint, orange mint, and also several different lemon balm, lime balm, and a lime thyme, as well as the lemon thyme. These, again, can be used in culinary things. I also have apple mint, which is very nice with pork. I planted a few seedlings of basil in the back so that I'd have some early basil. Most of my basil is in the vegetable garden. Also, we have sage and rosemary up in this section, and right now the valerian is in bloom. That again is a non-edible herb, but it has kind of an interesting history and is an old-fashioned type herb plant. It was used in various concoctions in olden days, but is no longer used to my knowledge. We also have comfrey, which is another one. Again, once used in apothecary work, but not anymore since there are better things available. And some of these herbs that were once used are now considered toxic, in fact, so they are not used as much for edible preparations. If the rhubarb goes to seed, we'll also pick off the stem from the rhubarb that has gone to seed so that it puts its energy into forming roots and shoots for next year's crop. Rhubarb did not do great this year. It's an early crop. The early things didn't do as well because of the lack of rain. With a good year, this rhubarb would be at least a foot taller than it is now. But since I don't water this garden artificially, it stayed a little shorter. One of my favorite herbs is lemon verbena, and I plant this pretty much in several places of the garden because I enjoy picking it and using it. It has a very nice lemon scent. It can be used in rice and other pastas, and also in baked goods. So it has a lot of uses, along with the lemon balm and the lemon thyme. Those are 3 lemon herbs that are often used in baked goods. I like to bake, so those are herbs that I use frequently and have a little more of those than some of the others. Let's move on to the perennial garden. It's in full bloom right now. The early lilies are now in bloom. I will have lilies blooming for the next month or so in different places in the garden. This is an early one. I have several bunches of them. And I've been diligent about the lily beetles, but I still check them frequently. And if I see damage, I know that I need to eradicate them. And again, I do it by hand. Anytime I try not to use toxic pesticides because of bee damage. Honeybees are in terribly short supply. I've seen maybe 2 this whole season. We fortunately have a lot of other pollinators, bumblebees and other bees and wasps that will pollinate the flowers. But because the honeybee is kind of an indicator of environmental damage in the whole area, it's good to reduce your use of pesticides as much as possible. Especially the neonicotinoids, which are the most dangerous to the bees. They're very effective, but really should not be used unless you really know what you're doing, and avoid times when the bees are active. Salvia is also in bloom, and once the salvia blossoms have passed, they bloom from the bottom up, and once a stem is completely finished, you can snip it off and more blossoms will come. This is a columbine. This is one that does not have spurs on it. I have some in the back that do. The Dusty Miller does bloom. I don't particularly like the blooms, and I tend to cut them off. Or perhaps I'll let them stay a little while and then cut them fairly quickly. I like it more as just a ground cover, and it certainly doesn't hurt to cut them off if you don't care for them, because it will continue to spread just as easily as it did with the blooms on it. Moving down this way, we still have bulb foliage, and it's starting to brown, especially underneath. And you should be able to grab it and pull off handfuls of it and dispose of them at this point. Again, we need to let it brown off in order to have blooms for next year. It's nice to have some plants with a little extra and other foliage, but as other plant darker colors, different colors, because quite frankly, blooms don't last forever. Cutting back anything that's past its prime also keeps the garden neat. I've interspersed daylilies here to kind of cover up the lily foliage. They blend in for a while and then they take over. These are daylilies. Daylilies and these lilies are not related. These come from a bulb that you plant in the fall, and these are planted as plants and have roots instead of a bulb underneath. I have several types of hardy geraniums, and these are ground covers, and they are hardy. They don't look like the geraniums that you find at the garden center, unless you're shopping in the perennial area, but they do make a nice ground cover, and they have a fairly long season of bloom. This is a plant that has bells on it. It tends to be invasive, so once these have completed their bloom, I'll want to get those blooms off before they go to seed to save work later. There are some bulbs, like the lilies, that bloom later. We're most familiar with the tulips and daffodils that bloom in the early spring. But this is Nectoscordum, and it's also called garlic lily, and it will open up and have a big seed pod. A little later it had pink blooms, and they form kind of a star shape. It's an interesting flower, and it adds a little depth to the flower garden. This is a plant you may not be familiar with. You don't see it in too many gardens today. It's called phlomis, and that's P-H-L-O-M-I-S. And it's an odd plant in that it blooms in layers. I like it, and it tends to be marginally hardy here. I've had very good luck with it here in the full sun, and in the fall I mulch it with some straw over the winter, and it's survived quite well. The leaves do not completely disappear, and I think that's why it's only marginally hardy. This is a verbasicum, and it too is nearly completing its run for the season, but there are some more stalks budded. So if we take off the old blooms, we should see some new ones forming along the way. And we may get a few more blooms from it. The iris is finished, and Siberian iris. Shasta daisies are just starting to bloom. Coral bells are adding some airiness and small flowers to the garden. Poppies have pretty much finished blooming. This one has one bloom left. And you'll see these are the bloom stalks. They had large pink, almost crepe paper-like flowers earlier, but yesterday's rain completely washed it away. There's a choice on these. They have kind of an interesting seed pod. And if you wish, you can leave them and let them dry, or right in place here, or I tend to let them dry for a little while and then cut them off and put them in the garden shed to finish drying. They can be very useful in fall decorations. You could spray paint them with gold or white or any color you might like, but they do hold the seed. And the seed on these are closed pods. Some other annual poppies that I have that will bloom later have an open pod, and the seed will spill from them and come up the following year. This is an oriental poppy, and it does not spread. You have one plant. Once it's finished blooming, it will die back. That's normal. So this foliage in another month or a month and a half will be completely gone. It may, under ideal conditions, come back up in the fall and give you at least foliage, but no bloom until next year. Roses are now blooming. This one took kind of a hit from the winter moth that has eaten a lot of the foliage on the maple trees as well, but it's coming back nicely. The winter moth is finished with its damage for the season and will not be a problem again. Most of the trees that were damaged will leaf out once more, and any of the plants damaged will also put on new leaves, which is what this rose is doing. It's a pink rose. I'm going to move down to this area and plant a few annuals. Bulb foliage is now going, and these will leave some holes in the garden. So we want to plant a few new things. This is another bulb that blooms at this time rather than early spring, April and May. These are alliums, and I have several different kinds. It's in the onion family, and that means that the critters don't bother it at all. So it's a nice one to have. They come in different colors. This has been a white one, and I also have had purple ones and lower ones, taller ones. There's so many different ones available. It's a bulb that you plant in the fall, and then it will come up in the summer and bloom in June, usually, although the bloom time kind of varies depending on the variety. They also, once this is completed with its bloom, it's blooming now, you'll see the seed head becomes kind of interesting, and I tend to leave these in the garden to dry, and they add a little interest to the garden with the spent seed head. I'm now going to fill some spaces. If you remember, last spring we did a winter seeding project. We put these outdoors in January in the milk cartons. This is a Verbena bonariensis. And what I want to do is fill in now with these plants. They've been outside since then, watered when necessary. They've formed let's see, they're quite good roots, and I'm going to just plant a few of those. These are an airy plant. They're fairly tall, but they're nice front of the border plants. I'm going to put a few in several places. The plan is that these will bloom, and the blooms will reseed where I've planted them, and then I will have more coming up next spring. The winter seeding that I did with this and with the butterfly weed were very successful. I've planted the butterfly weed already in several different areas of the garden. I have a few of these to put in another spot, somewhere else in the garden. And we'll keep these watered well if we don't get some natural rain. The other thing that I started in order to fill some of these spots left by the bulbs were some marigolds. Marigolds are probably the easiest thing to plant in the garden or in pots. The kids always plant them in school. They're one of the favorite school projects, Sunday school projects, are a few marigolds because they are so dependable as far as germination goes. And I'm just going to pop a few of these in. And again, as this bulb foliage goes, these hopefully will fill in the spot that would be left normally. I will put in 2 right now, and we'll have a few more later that I can add. And again, I'll probably keep a watering can nearby so that I can keep it watered. This is a sedum, and if your sedums are getting too large, it's possible, if you don't want them too large, to nip them off about now, or at least a few spots. This can also sometimes keep them from falling apart in the middle as they get larger. This year these have not grown quite as large as usual. This is a black-eyed Susan, and I do like them, and they're very pretty in the early fall, late summer. But they have a tendency to spread, so I have to keep them restrained. I restrain them to just a small area, and I have to be careful to pull out any starts because I'll find starts all over the garden. That the whole garden would be black-eyed Susans if I let it happen, but I don't. Moving over this way, we have peonies, and again, these are still going, and anything that goes, I try to get off before they shatter to the ground, but it doesn't always work out. So then we just kind of pick up after them or let them brown on the ground. This is a miniature rose down below, and all of the roses that are blooming now will get another round of fertilizer after their first flush of bloom, and hopefully we'll get some more bloom after that. Any annuals will also get fertilized, and I'll continue to clip off the spent blooms. Annuals will keep blooming. The perennials often have just one bloom cycle, but the annuals will continue to bloom. Behind here, it's a little hard to see with the peony, but we have a chrysanthemum, and there's still time to pinch off the chrysanthemum up until about July 4th, and that'll be the last. Just the blooming, the shoots that are coming up, just nip off the tops. This will keep the plant short and bushy and prolong its flowering. It'll keep, you'll have more flowers because it makes more stalks every time you snip it off. It puts up 2 shoots instead of 1, and that will have blooms. So you'll have 2 blooms instead of 1 on each one that you've snipped. The iris is finished, and I'm deadheading that. Deadheading means taking off the blooming stalks, and that's true of all the Siberian iris and the iris. Now, you don't have to do this, but it does make for a neater looking garden if you do take these off. Anytime a plant forms seed, it takes away some of the strength of the plant. So by removing the bloom stalks, you will strengthen the base of the plant. The plant right here is an aster, and it will bloom in the fall. This is a blue one, but it's gotten very thick, as asters tend to do. The other problem with asters is that they're prone to mildew. So one of the things I can do to help prevent that is to thin it. That means fewer blooms, but we might get better blooms and a nicer looking plant overall. So I will thin this out so that it's not so crowded. The same is true of phlox. If you thin it, it is less likely to have as much mildew problem. The other thing I can do is use a product called Serenade. And this I've mixed in a pump sprayer. It's a fungicide, and I'll just spray this about every 2 weeks. And maybe every week if I start to notice that white coating on the leaves. This can also be used on things like phlox and other plants like bee balm that are prone to mildew. So far we haven't had a problem. It's been dry, but usually in July and August is when the problems start. So I'm going to be proactive and use either Serenade or a half and half combination of milk and water, which is probably what I'll use in the vegetable garden. And both of those will help with the mildew problem. They may not eliminate it completely. We have more lilies that are going to bloom shortly, and more daisies here that will soon be finished and need to be cut back. That about concludes this part of the tour. We're going to move over now to the vegetable garden. The vegetable garden has really taken off. All of our seeds have come up, and with few exceptions. There were a few flowers that didn't come up, so I planted some other flowers that we had started in that area. If you have seeds that didn't come up, it's not too late now to replant. Sometimes they get washed out, sometimes the birds eat the seed. I had one hill of zucchini that did not manage to come up, so I've replanted that. We're ready finally to do some harvesting in the garden, so it's time to eat some things from it. We have to pick scallions and or onions. If you leave these, they will become onions, but right now you can pick some for as scallions. I have cilantro. This reseeds itself in my garden every year. This is one starting to go to seeds. I'm going to pick off the top of it so that it doesn't go to seed, and hopefully we'll get more leaves from it. It's one of my favorites. The season is somewhat short, but I have planted more. You can keep planting it all summer, and that ensures a supply. We have some spinach. Thanks to the rain, the spinach is not too bad at all. And we can pick enough of that to put in a salad. Again, this can be replanted in another month for a fall crop. The other plants in here are calandulas, which are flowers, and they also reseed. I do like them. They're one of the edible flowers. They can be used in place of saffron. It's a saffron replacement. The peas have gone crazy, and the snow peas are ready to pick. We're loaded with snow peas. So they'll be on the dinner menu frequently now, and they can also be frozen. But there's plenty of peas to be picked, and these are best picked when they're young. Further along, I have snap peas. They aren't quite ready. They'll be the next ones, and then the shell peas, which will form peas that need to be shelled out. You'll notice that in between the rows, I've put in my seedlings of winter squash. These are butternut and buttercup squash, and those will develop as the spinach and the radishes and the onions are used out of this area. We also have arugula, another favorite of mine, a peppery herb, also wonderful in salad. And moving further along, radishes, something else to add to our salad. And they did pretty well this year, in spite of our dry season. Lettuce, the earliest planted lettuce is ready, and so is the later planted lettuce. It's coming along pretty well. But this is the lettuce we planted early. And if you just pick off the outside leaves, frequently the inner leaves will continue to develop until the really hot weather comes along. I'm going to move around to this side. And I have strawberries. I've been able to pick a few. I put in new strawberries this year, which are not going to be ready until next year, but I saved a few of the old ones, and I'm keeping them under wraps to try to keep the birds and chipmunks out. Not always too successfully, but we've been able to get a few fresh berries from it. And we'll continue to get them as long as they bear, and then we'll pull them out. Within another 2 or 3 weeks, these plants will come out of the garden, and this will give me space to plant a few later crops. The new strawberries are coming along really well. It's important to keep them weeded. And they're starting to form runners. These are the long shoots that are coming out, and that's just what we want them to do. We want these to form runners that multiply across the way. And they're starting to do it. You can place these wherever you'd like them to root, and they will root. And this will become a row, probably this wide by next year. I have parsnips and beets in this area and other root vegetables. And it's time to thin some of these out. You want them to be at least 4 or 5 inches apart. You can use the greens on the beets, again, in salads. And it's a job that takes some care because you don't want to pull out all of them. You just want to pull out selected ones, leaving the strongest plants. You can start by leaving them 2 inches apart, and then when they form baby beets, you can use those. And then the mature beets will be maybe 4 or 5 inches apart. Again, we can continue to use those. These are some bitter greens. There's mustard, there's arugula, different things. It comes in a package, and it's one of the aspects of mesclun salad, which is a mixture of greens. and they're ready to pick as well. They will keep bearing as long as you keep cutting them. It's kind of a cut and come again salad. Carrots also need to be thinned. They tend to come up very close together. And again, you can leave those a little ways apart and use them as baby carrots a little later. The greens on the carrots I don't prefer, so I don't know of anyone that eats them, though someone might, I don't know. These are the crops I've had under wraps, and I took it off today just to show you how they've done really well. They have not had the insect damage that they probably would have if I had left them out. I will be recovering them. We like kale. I have kale from seed down at this end, and these are kale that I started inside. And this is ready to use right now. And the other kale is also ready if you want really baby kale, and that needs to be thinned and again can be used. But this kale is ready to use now in salads, stir fries, sauteed, or just however you want to use it. Very nutritious vegetable. The broccoli and the piracicaba, which is a form of broccoli, are doing well. And I, again, will recover these very quickly. The beans have come up. In fact, some of them are even looking like they're starting to have some blossoms. I planted 5 kinds of beans this year. Some of them are shell beans and some of them are for serving as green or yellow snap beans. I planted soybeans, a few. They did not come up well, and I will replant some of those. I planted cannellini beans, which are the white Italian dry beans, and also some garbanzo beans, just to see how it worked. Various forms of lettuce are coming up here. You can start to use the lettuce anytime. Again, take the outer leaves and the inner leaves will continue to develop. Herbs have come up. I have marjoram and a good-sized row of basil and then some more beets. The tomatoes are starting to climb. Soon we'll tie those to the posts. Eggplant is doing well. I used the black plastic under the eggplant and peppers in hopes of keeping the soil very warm. They really like it hot, so our hot days have been very beneficial for them. Under wraps, I still have the Brussels sprouts. And again, these are snap beans. More herbs. And over here we have lemon basil, lime basil, and opal basil, which is a dark purple basil. They'll be more showy as time goes on. And a row of flowers for enjoyment. Some celery. These are the celery plants were started inside and set out, and it will mature later on, as will the zucchini and yellow squash. The cucumbers have come up, and they need something to climb on. This would be true of pole beans if you planted those too. But I'm going to give these something to climb on. And we'll start at the base and tie on the string. And I need my scissors. Tie it around the base, and then I'm going to tie it back in. and go up and down between the post and the bottom string. And I will continue in like fashion all the way around the teepee, and it won't be long, and these will be climbing and they will completely cover the teepee with the foliage and cucumbers. They're a lot easier to pick this way when they're hanging in the air. This will also work for pole beans if you've planted pole beans. And you could also do peas this way if you wanted to plant them around it instead of on a fence. Our lovage is starting to go to seed. It makes a great seed head. I like them for floral arrangements. It has a nice yellowish plume on it. Later on, once it's started to go to seed, I will clip them all off. But we can still continue to use the lovage. I did make a lovely lovage pesto last week, and it turned out to be one of the best things to do with lovage that I've ever done. It was delicious and well worth saving the lovage plant so that I'll have more next year. The lovage is a perennial and will come back each year and probably grow in size. Now let's move into the shade garden. Containers have been filled, window boxes, and all kinds of annual containers. Many of these were cuttings that we took last fall. If you have watched my show for the last year, you saw us taking cuttings of things, and they can be very useful to add to the pots to fill them out, especially if you have a lot of pots to fill. Others are annuals. This is verbena, and I really like verbena. It blooms and blooms and blooms. I have geraniums in here as well, and any of these do need to be deadheaded periodically. And when you deadhead geraniums, be sure to go all the way down to the bottom of the bloom instead of just snapping off its head. Otherwise you'll end up with a porcupine-looking plant of all stalks. So go all the way down to where it comes out and take it off from there. The verbena, you can take off just the head. And once they're spent, this one's almost gone, you can just take off the piece right here. And it will continue to form blossoms. I do water these frequently, and I add some liquid fertilizer probably every week to 10 days to keep the blossoms going. This is a dahlia that I planted the bulb in the spring. It's going to have a pink bloom. It's one that'll get about 3 feet high. Window boxes dry out very quickly in the sun, so be sure to water those. One of the tricks that I've heard of and I've used is to put some ice cubes in the window box and let them melt. Or if you happen to have leftover ice in your drink, just pour it in your plant. And it will melt in a little more slowly, and they will be able to take it up better than having it run off. If you've brought houseplants out, and all my houseplants come out for the summer with few exceptions, and if you've brought them out, you'll need to repot them. We repotted this avocado that incidentally grew in the compost last year. I found it there and said, oh, an avocado tree. Having had no luck growing them in the house in the past, this one grew in the compost, so I decided to keep it. I have clipped the top so that it'll form a couple different branches as it grows, and I have repotted it now twice. When you repot a plant, you only want to go about 2 inches bigger than the prior pot. So this one's had 2 repottings. The avocado seed is still down there, and we'll see what it does. It's basically a free plant, and it may get quite tall. It may form an actual avocado tree. Other plants that have outgrown their pots need to be repotted. But again, just a couple inches larger at a time, even though the eventual plant may get quite large. Moving back into the shade, this planter is pretty much all coleus. This is one that we had in petunias and lettuce earlier in the season. And right now in the shade garden, we are experiencing a multitude of maple seedlings. The maples, evidently this year with the drought, thought they were going to die, so they dropped a lot of seed, and most of it is grown. So I'm very busy weeding out maple seedlings from pots, from the soil, everywhere. This is mostly coleus because it's in the shade. This is a plant that does quite well in a shady situation. And again, if you want it to fill out, just pick out the leaves in the center. Rhododendrons have now pretty much past their blooming, and you can remove, if you wish, the seed pods. This is done for making them look nice. You just use your thumb and forefinger and remove the seed area. It also keeps them from going to seed. You'll notice that this is where the new foliage and the growth is occurring on these plants. It's also where the new blooms will be setting for next year. So you want to do it fairly soon if you're going to do it. And I tend to do it in the areas that are most noticeable and leave them in areas that are not. So I will not go all the way up to the top of the plant on this one because it's pretty tall. But I do take them off here along the edge. If you want to do some pruning on your rhododendron, this is a good time to do it. Take out a whole stalk here and there. Prune them up a little bit. This is getting a little large up in here, so I'll probably head it back. Again, right now, after it's bloomed, before it sets its blooms for next year, is the time to do the pruning of both rhododendrons and azaleas and any other spring blooming shrub. Hostas are kind of at their peak right now, and as we move along, you'll see a lot of hosta, different shapes. I like the plant very much. I've been using my deer spray and slug treatment on it, so right now it's in pretty good shape. The deer and the slugs tend to bother it most when it's young, but as far as deer go, they can bother at any time, so you really need to keep up with the deer spray. Slugs are not as much of a problem with the hosta unless they're very small ones. And then you need to make sure they have the slug pellets around them to keep them from getting eaten. The slugs also like impatiens, and if you've planted those and you have one that looks like this, it means the slugs have been busy, and you need to use some of the slug pellets around that as well. They can really do a number on it. I prefer to plant my impatiens in containers. This is another one that was purchased at the same time, but it's up off the ground and the slugs can't get at it at least as easily, and it's doing much better, as you can see. I'm down in the shade garden now. It's a really nice place to be on a hot day, and things are really at peak here. The hosta have all achieved their individual shapes and sizes. Some have gold edges, some have gold centers, some are large, some are small. A variety of hosta. I hear people say, oh, I don't like hosta. Most of the time they've only seen one kind. There are so many different kinds that you can really make a shade garden almost entirely in hosta and not have too many repeats. Some of the leaves are broad. There are hostas that also have long, thin leaves. Various shades of white, green, and yellow. They're really a very useful plant because once you keep them from getting eaten by the deer and slugs, they fill in the area very nicely. They're cool, they're relaxing, and they mix so nicely with ferns and other ground covers. I really encourage them. I also have the hellebores, which have finished blooming, and I let them go to seed so that I will have more hellebores. And this is a seed pod on one of them. You can see it's forming little capsules inside that have the seed in them in the middle of the bloom. And those will seed themselves around the garden and can be moved to other spots in the garden. I have various types of ferns, hay-scented fern, lady fern. Again, there are many, many different kinds of ferns. A lot of people say, oh, I have shade, I can't garden. That isn't true at all, and a shade garden may be just the thing because, as I said, it's nice to work in the summer because it's always a little bit cooler than the rest of the garden. And there are a number of things you can grow here. Moving down to the pond. Since our last episode, I've added plants to the pond. The iris pretty much stays here all year. It's a hardy iris. And I've added a ginger and 2 elephant ears, which hopefully will grow and thrive throughout the season and become quite a lot larger. Also, an umbrella plant, which I kept over during the winter, as I did one of the elephant ears inside. The fish are very active right now, and when the weather is really warm, it's important to remember that they need to be fed more often, usually twice a day, or sometimes even more than that. The water needs to be circulated regularly and filters cleaned. And it's important not to overload your pond with fish. If you have a lot of plants in your pond, and if you're in the sun, you probably will have more plants than I do because this is a shaded garden. The fish tend to multiply rapidly. I don't have that problem. I don't have a lot of plants in the bottom, but some people get way too many fish in the pond and then they have trouble keeping the water clear because of all the fish waste. So if you have a lot of fish, you may want to find some friends that would like to have a pond, and you can help them start it by giving them some fish. I have some good sized fish now, but I only have about 9, and that seems to be the right amount for this pond. There are guidelines online telling you how many fish per cubic foot of water is an adequate amount. Also, guidelines on plants to be used in the pond, and more guidelines on how to keep the water clear. Again, with the enzymes that I put in the spring and periodically throughout the year, I can usually keep it pretty clear most of the time. The fish see that I'm here. They're interesting because they will come right up because they see I'm standing here, and they know what happens when I'm standing here is that they usually get fed. So I guess we better give them a little food. And they'll come up and eat it. They soon come to recognize when you stand near a certain spot that food is on its way. A couple other plants that grow well in the shade would be a stilbe, and this is a plant that will bloom in red, pink, or white. And this is a grass, oat grass, which also will take part shade. And this one is carex, and it comes in several sizes and colorations. This one is the variety Ice Dance, which has a nice white edge to it. It mixes nicely with the hosta and ground covers of the shade garden. Now let's go inside and see what we can do with some of the things that we picked today. We also talk about preserving some of the things and using them in different ways, things that we've picked from the garden. This is a cup of rose petals, and what I'm going to make is a rose petal linen spray. And I'm going to add these to 2 cups of water in a pan, and I'll stir it a little bit. And we're going to bring that to a boil and simmer it for about a minute. And after it's simmered for about a minute, I will pour it into a bowl, and then we'll let it set and just out at room temperature for about 12 hours. We want the scent from the rose petal to be infused into the water. After we've let it set for 12 hours, we can strain out the rose petals, and we'll put the mixture into a spray bottle, and you can use it to spray linens and have a nice rose petal, faint rose petal smell. I'm suspecting we can do the same thing with lavender when it's in bloom. And I think I might enjoy the lavender a great deal. So I'll definitely try it with that. And see what I can do. But if you have fragrant rose petals, and when the roses are about ready to lose their petals, you might as well use them and try to do something with them. So here we've let it simmer for about a minute. I'll pour it into another bowl, and we'll just let that mixture sit for about 12 hours. Since that'll be 3 a.m., I think maybe it'll be a little longer than that. And then we can strain it. The other thing we can do with the chive blossoms, and these are, maybe a third of a cup of chive blossoms, and that is easy to make chive vinegar. And I'm just going to pour a cup of vinegar over the chive blossoms. And there's another one that we can let sit. And they used to say you had to put it in the sun. You really don't. You can just leave that in the kitchen and let it set for about 2 weeks until the vinegar takes on a nice purple coloration, pink or purple color. That can be used as regular vinegar in salads, good on fish and chips. Nice little tangy onion taste to it. I'm going to make a cheese dip, a 3-herb cheese dip, and this one's pretty simple. I've used light cream cheese, and I'll thin it down with some cream. About a quarter of a cup. I want to stir it around well. Till it's very smooth. This will thicken up once it's refrigerated, if you refrigerate it. The milk is incorporated, or the cream. You can use milk, cream, your choice. I used a light cream. We'll add some salt. And just a little touch of cayenne pepper. And then I'm going to add parsley. And the suggested amount for a 8-ounce package of cream cheese is about 2 tablespoons. And dill. We also have dill in the garden that's come up volunteer. I also have planted some for later use. And I'll add some chives. Again, about 2 tablespoons. And we can stir this all together. And this would be a 3-herb cheese dip. Some of these things away, and we'll serve that with some crackers and have a nice hors d'oeuvre or even lunch. The next thing that I want to make is homemade ranch dressing. We have plenty of lettuce, and we have radishes, we have scallions, and I bought some tomatoes. We have really great salad season coming on. And I like to make my own salad dressings. And ranch dressing can be homemade as well as purchased. I prefer not to have the dressings that have a lot of preservatives in them. So I'm going to start with 2 tablespoons of mayonnaise, and I'm going to add about twice as much buttermilk. And this is a buttermilk ranch, which is very traditional. And I'll just whip that together. Those are 2 tablespoons, and then we'll add the other 2. It seems to mix a little better if you do it gradually. And then we'll add some things to that. This is a vinegar I made last summer. I called it Summer Memories Herbal Vinegar. It included rice vinegar, tarragon, chives, basil, and borage. A little of each. And I'm just going to add about a half teaspoon of that. You can use any type of vinegar you want, but this gives it a little flavor. Some coarsely ground pepper. As much or as little as you want. This is one of those things, once you have the base, you can just add other things to it. And I'm going to add some tarragon, just a little bit, some chopped green onion, and some chopped Italian parsley. Remember, we still have parsley that can be used. It's starting to go to seed, but it's still usable. And we have our ranch dressing. You could also use this as a dip if you prefer, rather than a salad dressing. But I'll use that with our salad, and we can have a nice salad of various vegetables with ranch dressing. The other thing that's in season right now are strawberries. And I've made some muffins with strawberries. This was a good recipe. It has a streusel topping. It's a muffin batter, probably about a half a recipe of a muffin batter with strawberries on top, chopped strawberries, and then a streusel topping. And they turned out pretty well and are a nice way to use strawberries. But of course, the traditional thing is strawberry shortcake. And you can use cake. I believe a lot of the people use the little sponge cakes, but where I'm from, which is the Midwest, biscuits were the tradition. Just a nice sour buttermilk biscuit with strawberries on it. Once you add a little strawberry or a little sugar to the strawberries, it will bring out the juices in the berries. It doesn't take a whole lot, but you want to have a little juice in the berries. And you have a lid for your strawberry shortcake. We'll add a few more berries. And then you can add cream or whipped cream, heavy cream, ice cream, whatever you'd like on your strawberry shortcake. That's what's in season right now and some of the things that you can do with it. I'm Liz Davey. You've been watching A Walk in the Garden on NCTV. This is one of the episodes in a multi-episode series of garden shows, and I hope you'll join me again. Thank you.